We still have folks joining, but I'm just going to jump right in because we've got a lot of fun content to cover today. So welcome everyone to the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition General Body Meeting. First one of the year. Thank you so much for being a member of the coalition, aka a subscriber. We're really glad to have you in this group staying informed about the issues that pertain to Hoosier housing needs. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is a quick round of introductions for myself and the speakers, but also all of you here. So what I want us to do is introduce ourselves in the chat. And in the meantime, us speakers will introduce ourselves out loud. I'll go first. My name is Hale Crumley, and I'm the policy manager at Prosperity Indiana, which means that I do all sorts of education for our members and partners on how to advocate. I also convene, of course, our 3 statewide advocacy coalitions, like the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. So I'm going to hand it to my colleague, Andrew, to introduce himself. But in the meantime, please introduce yourself in the chat. Say your name, organization, and what you do if you think that's helpful.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Bradley. I'm Policy Director for Prosperity Indiana, and I work with our members to put together our annual policy agenda, and then I work with Hale and our coalition partners and members to advance that agenda throughout the year, as well as working with federal and other state partners to make sure that we have as wide of a policy and advocacy impact as possible. So Hale, should I hand it off to another guest? All right, let me hand it off to John West.
Hello, my name is John West. I am an associate professor of urban planning at Ball State, and I am one of the founding board members of the Muncie Land Bank. I'll be talking to you about land banks today. And Stephanie is going to talk next.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Giardo. I'm the Education and Advocacy Manager with the Indianapolis Community Land Trust being launched by Kuyper Institute. And I have Jeffrey Washburn joining us as well. Jeffrey?
Thanks, Stephanie. Good afternoon. Name's Jeff Washburn. I'm a consultant, community land trust consultant, working with Burlington Associates, in this case with the Indianapolis Community Land Trust. Glad to be joining you today from Minneapolis.
Great. Thank you all so much. I'm so glad that you're here. And I see the chat is exploding with introductions. That is wonderful. Please keep introducing yourself in the chat. Before we get started much further, I want to make sure to also do a little bit of an introduction for the steering committee of this coalition. If you didn't know, the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition has over 2,000 members statewide. Occasionally, like I said, email subscribers, but folks who are engaged nonetheless, and we're so glad to have you here.
And again,
sorry about that, folks. Somebody came off mute. So I wanted to introduce this group to you. This is the steering committee, which is an elected body that helps lead this group. They are experts from all over the state who provide their intel on really the policies that we work on, but also what's happening on the ground in different parts of the state when it comes to eviction, homelessness, really all aspects of housing. So this is an amazing group that we are very lucky to have helping us lead on really, again, all Hoosier housing needs. I also want to take just a quick second to introduce Prosperity Indiana in case anyone here is not familiar with us. So just to reiterate, that is the organization that employs Andrew and myself, but also is the lead convener of the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. Prosperity Indiana is Indiana's statewide association for community economic development. We are a membership-based organization with around 200 members across Indiana, and those members are mostly nonprofits, but also banks, local governments, really anyone who's interested in strengthening their communities. The things that we offer through the coalition are free because we're just so glad to have the engagement that we do. But if you're looking for more of this or the extra benefits that we add to Prosperity Indiana members only, please consider looking into our membership. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But for now, let's get into our agenda. Today, we're going to be talking about land banks, community land trusts, legislation about these things, how to get involved, and having a Q&A. So we've got a really full day for us today. This is an extended webinar, as you may have noticed, and I don't want to waste too much more time. But for now, I'm going to throw it over to John West to talk about land banks. John? And John, you're muted actually, if you wouldn't mind unmuting.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. All right, thank you. So I introduced myself earlier. I'm an associate professor of urban planning at Ball State. I was also one of the founding board members of the Muncie Land Bank. And through my academic work and the work that I've done with the land bank, I've come to understand a lot about land banking, and there is a lot to know. So I will give you a brief introduction here. So let's see. I just want to start real basic. You all are probably aware of this, working in housing and nonprofit world. Land banks are needed because vibrant neighborhoods turn into disinvested ones. Neighborhoods begin to lose homeowners and responsible landlords as a result of equity challenges. Oftentimes there's a specific trigger. So for example, in Muncie, we lost a couple of factories in the early 2000s, and all of a sudden we have much more disinvestment. And that led to a shift in the market. People started wanting to live more on the periphery of the city and less in the center of the city. And that leads to increased vacancy, which then cycles around and reduces tax revenues, has negative impact on the economy of the city, and also impacts the availability of high quality housing. So it really is a cycle, and land banking is designed to break this cycle. So a land bank is typically a public authority that focuses on the conversion of vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent properties to productive use. We call these VAD properties, and it can be helpful to think of SAD properties because they're properties that you see when you're driving through neighborhoods that have been disinvested, that have broken out windows, that have overgrown weeds, that have broken down walkways, and oftentimes we even see them burnt out. So VAD properties are the target of land banking. And I mean, if there's anything, those of you who are going to be doing advocacy for the legislation, if there's one thing that I want you to take away today, it's that land banks increase the supply of developable property in cities, right? So land banks clear property both physically in terms of weeds and burnt out structures and trees and trash. They do the physical maintenance of abandoned property, but perhaps more importantly, they do the legal repairs that are necessary to create a property that is marketable. So I'm going to get more into that legal process and some of the things that make land banking work necessary in a second, but I just wanted to make sure that you take with you that land banks increase the supply of developable properties, especially in disinvested neighborhoods. And that is why our legislation is important. So to function, land banks really need only two things, right? Land banks need to be able to efficiently acquire property. So anyone on this call right now could go to one of our tax lien sales and purchase a property, but it would cost us a lot to clear the liens and get the property into shape. Land banks have to pay for those same things unless state law makes it easier for land banks to acquire the property. Land banks need the ability to efficiently acquire property, and they need funding to hire staff, maintain and market property. And a really important one that I'm going to get to towards the end is you need money in order to responsibly dispose of property. So you want to make sure that the people who are buying the property once it's been rehabilitated are going to do something productive with it. So, and in order to function, state law really determines the extent to which land banks have funding and access to property. And I will show that a little bit by comparing some different state land banking laws and the success of land banking practice in various states. So where do land banks get their property? You can see here that the vast majority of it comes from the property tax lien or foreclosure processes. So that is a process in which someone has become delinquent either on their taxes or on their mortgage, and the government steps in and facilitates a process where either the back taxes or the owed mortgage is paid off, or there's a process for transferring ownership of the property to a new owner. I'm not going to get into the other modes of where land banks get their property from, because it's not super germane here, but you can see it on the screen. So land banks get most of their property from tax lien and mortgage foreclosure. And the reason, one of the really big reasons that land banks are necessary is because the way that the system is set up with tax liens and mortgage foreclosures is there's a huge market or regulatory failure, which is to say that it's not clear who owns the property when someone walks away from it. If someone passes away or leaves town and decides it's not worth selling the property or owes more in taxes than the property is worth, then you have a clouded title, and the question really is who owns the property and who is responsible for the property. And that leads to further deterioration of properties that are surrounding it. Go in here. All right. And this is my fruit metaphor slide. So properties are just like a banana that you have sitting on your counter at home. If you let it sit for too long, it's going to get ruined and it's going to become worthless. And the way that our regulatory process works makes it so that properties sit for between 18 and 24 months, depending on when a person sort of walks away from the property and abandons it. And that's because the property has to be delinquent on taxes a couple of times, and the tax sale only happens once a year, and then there's a 1-year redemption period. I'm sure that all of you have gone on vacation, left your house, and come back inside and been like, oh, it's a little funky in here. Imagine what a house would be like after 24 months of sitting vacant without air conditioning, without electricity. And so that really decreases the supply of marketable housing. And as land banks are really set up to take the property that nobody else wants, right? To take property that is sort of the worst of the worst. Most of the property that land banks own are structure-free lots. So it creates the potential for new development. Oftentimes, this property is disposed of in terms of giving it to the next door neighbor and they expand their yard, or creating a community or pocket park because the property has so little value. You can see the image on one side of the screen. There is a group of properties that are for sale from the Muncie Land Bank right now, and you can see our starting bid is $300, and those are all structure-free lots. When we do acquire properties with structures on them, most of the time those properties are in pretty rough shape. Only about 25% are in fair to good shape, and with the rest being in poor or hazardous shape. And so what that means in the end is that land banks properties are typically sold at a loss, right? So this graph and all of these graphs come from the Center for Community Progress, which is a national land banking organization. And this was a survey of all land banks in the United States. So survey respondents said that only about 30% of properties are sold at fair market value, which means that most of the time when a land bank is selling property, they're doing so at a loss. So it's not a get rich quick scheme. It's not any properties that can be purchased and flipped for a profit. Someone in the for-profit world is probably going to do that. So, who buys land bank properties? This is a really important consideration. So, in a typical tax lien sale process, an abandoned property is put up for auction. And in that auction, anyone from anywhere can bid on those properties and take the properties. And oftentimes the people who bid and take the properties don't really do anything with them. They might be buying them to speculate. They might have, grandiose ideas of what they're going to do that never get accomplished. With a land bank, a really important part of our function is to vet buyers. And as a result of that vetting, most of the properties that land banks dispose of go to local residents. They go to locally or regionally based nonprofits. They go to local developers. So really, it enables people who are in the community to have access to property and land and to do something responsible with it. And I want to give you an example of that. So at the Muncie Land Bank, as part of our bidder vetting process, where someone bids on a property, but then they have to go through a process of telling us what they're going to do with it. We encountered two gentlemen who had complementary skills, right? One's a plumber, the other is an electrician. And what they decided to do is to buy two separate properties and then swap labor. So you can see here, L. Brown and Vinnie Linz. They purchased two properties for us, and they are in the process of rehabbing them. And that is because we have the staff and the time and, frankly, the money to negotiate these kinds of deals. Another really important kind of success that land banks experience is in land assembly. So oftentimes when you're trying to assemble land in a particular neighborhood for a more comprehensive neighborhood revitalization strategy, you'll find that the property is owned by 15 different LLCs from all over the United States. Land banks can acquire those properties, group them together, and turn them over to one user. So the slide that you see on the screen right now is from a project that Englewood CDC led. It was a 22 property package, and one of the properties was turned into a net zero low cost housing development that was designed by Ball State students called the Alley House. And land banks can do this at a decent volume when they're funded. So this is the Indianapolis Land Bank. This is sort of their track record of success. And you can see that certain points they're selling hundreds, or they're disposing of hundreds of abandoned properties in a year. A third of those properties go to local nonprofits, and it leads to $142 million of community investment. Let's talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, right? So at the beginning, I said state regulation is really important for acquiring properties efficiently and for funding. And you can see in this map here that the dispersion of land banks is not even. So any of those squares that are colored blue is a county land bank. Any of the dots are a municipal land bank. And the yellow are land banks that cover more than one county, right? And you can see they're concentrated in Michigan and Ohio. And Indiana is, pretty far behind those two. And the reason is that the state of Michigan and the state of Ohio have really been innovators in the land bank space. In Ohio, they make it really easy for counties to access clean titles on properties. And they also have created a few fees associated with the tax lien sale process that fund land banks. So you can see really kind of the dramatic difference between Ohio and Michigan and Indiana. Our current Indiana law for land banking was passed in 2016, and it is really useful for one kind of problem. And the kind of problem they were concerned about, or the kind of the legislation that they were able to get passed, really makes land bank an above the board process. There's a lot of regulation, a lot of oversight, very specific requirements in terms of the board composition and board appointments. However, the legislation does not provide any resources either in terms of property or funding. And we talked about Ohio already a minute ago, but I will just go back again and say what makes the difference is that anytime a property becomes delinquent on taxes, it can be transitioned to the land bank in a very short period of time with very low cost. And the fee structure that they've created enables land banks to be well funded, to hire staff and to do their disposition process. And so with that in mind, I wanted to end with this idea that the source of land bank powers is typically through state enabling legislation, and land banks are only as powerful and flexible as the statutes that create them. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions at the end of the session. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, John. My name is Stephanie Guillardo. I am the Education and Advocacy Manager for the Indianapolis Community Land Trust, which is being launched by Kepler Institute, a grassroots organization that works to build community wealth. As I'm sure you're aware, the lack of affordable housing has been a persistent and growing problem in Indianapolis, statewide and nationally. With the ever-increasing rising cost of housing, many Black, Brown, and under-resourced residents in Indianapolis struggle to find safe and affordable places to live, which puts a strain on their ability to build wealth and contribute to the community. One method of addressing this is by creating a community land trust, or a CLT. I want to note that creating a CLT in Indianapolis will not solve the deep problems that got us to this point, including the racial caste system and financialization of housing. But we believe it can begin to address these challenges by providing a pathway to cooperative homeownership, stabilizing communities, and building relationships and community wealth. So today I'm going to chat and tell you a little bit about how CLTs started and have expanded, give you some nitty-gritty about how it works, and how the Community Land Trust is an affordable housing solution. The ideas behind the Community Land Trust have historic roots in the indigenous Americas and pre-colonial Africa and in ancient Chinese economic systems. The US origination was influenced by planned communities in the UK, India, and Israel. New Communities, Inc. is the prototype for the modern-day Community Land Trust, was established in Albany, Georgia in 1969 for the purpose of combating discrimination in land rights and lending. Black farmers were losing land because they didn't have access to credit. Backed by a federal grant, New Communities, Inc. acquired nearly 6,000 acres of farm and woodland, which made up the largest tract of Black-owned land in the US at the time. The community ownership provided members some security that they could stay there, regardless of how they voted, if they voted, or what color their skin was. At the end of the planning phase, the governor vetoed a grant which started a 15-year battle to hold onto the land. The battle was lost in 1985 after a series of disasters, both natural, like a drought, and man-made, like shots fired in offices, denial of loans, and diluted fertilizer. The property was foreclosed, and those in the CLT were forced off the land. The new owners wanted to rid the land of anything that would remind them of the previous owners, so they went so far as to dig holes and push buildings into them. New Communities, Inc. became part of a class action lawsuit and eventually won and received a settlement. New Communities used the proceeds to purchase over 1,600 acres of Cypress Pond Plantation property. The Cypress Pond Plantation property was once the property of the largest slaveholder in Georgia. After the purchase of Cypress Pond Plantation in 2011, New Communities set out to create a unique headquarters to serve as a catalyst for growth in individuals, healing in the community, and transformation across the globe. This new property has been named Resora. Following the founding of New Communities, Inc., CLTs began to spring up in other states and spread quickly into cities in the 1980s. The model has been adapted in many countries, including Canada, Kenya, Australia, the UK, and Puerto Rico, always tailored to meet local needs. Here in Indiana, we have several that are in various stages of development and launch. In South Bend, the South Bend Heritage Foundation closed on their first CLT home just a month ago and has another house closing soon. Here in Indianapolis, we're hoping to open applications this quarter. We're very excited. In Bloomington, there are two different community land trusts, Summit Hill CLT and Avalon CLT. In Evansville, there are 9 homes with first rights of refusal, and they're working on their CLT bylaws. And in Hamilton County, their CLT should also launch this year. Now I'm going to share with you how a CLT works, and I have a quick video that will help explain that. Just one moment.
Community land trusts, or CLTs, are nonprofit organizations that acquire, own, and steward land permanently for the common good. The most common CLT land use is housing, but retail, office, and a variety of other uses are possible. CLTs give formal decision-making voice and power to local community residents in determining land uses. Here's how CLTs make home buying affordable for families in their communities. First, the CLT builds or buys homes using one-time public or private investment. Next, the CLT sells just the home to a low-income buyer who qualifies for a mortgage, and the CLT keeps the land, holding it in trust for future generations of home buyers. In return for being able to buy a home at a discounted price, the family agrees to pay it forward and sell to another low-income family at a price they can afford. The CLT manages the sales process, ensuring that each home-buying family builds some wealth from a predetermined, limited amount of the sales proceeds. In this way, the one-time public or private investment in CLT homes makes lasting affordability a reality and stabilizes communities. And CLTs benefit the larger community too, as they preserve and protect housing for long-term residents, helping to build stronger, safer, and higher quality diverse neighborhoods, contributing to greater educational attainment, employment opportunities, and health outcomes. Visit groundedsolutions.org to learn more about CLTs today.
So the Classic Community Land Trust is an independent nonprofit organization that serves a defined geographic area. For us, it will either be Marion County or Indianapolis, to be decided by our board in the next few months. Membership is open to anyone within that defined service area. This is one of the elements that makes the Classic Community Land Trust unique. Instead of just serving the direct beneficiaries, those who live or work on land trust land, the Community Land Trust is accountable to their entire membership and their entire community. CLTs have a tripartite board, so the board is divided into 3 equal groups of representatives. The first third is made up of leaseholders, people living on or using CLT land. The second third is made up of community members. The third group is made up of technical experts, funders, or other stakeholders in the organization. Because 2/3 of the group is made up of community members, they hold the majority of votes. This is why we say that the Community Land Trust are community-controlled organizations. CLTs use a dual ownership model in order to secure the property for the common good and to ensure its ongoing affordability. In a dual ownership structure, the individual, most frequently an under-resourced homebuyer, purchases and owns just the improvements, the house. The Community Land Trust retains ownership of the land underneath the home. A 99-year ground lease ties the improvements in the land together. This ground lease does a few critical things. First, it outlines the rights and responsibilities of the homeowner and the rights and responsibilities of the Community Land Trust. Second, it establishes use restrictions, like requiring the homeowner to live in the property as their primary residence. Third, it establishes affordability restrictions. Quick fun fact, CLT homes can be passed down to future generations. The land remains the property of the CLT, and the new owner would take on the original ground lease. Perpetual affordability restrictions are what set community land trust apart from other forms of affordable housing development. CLTs ensure that the homes that they develop are affordable not only to the first occupant, but to future generations as well. They do this by removing the land and home from the speculative market, reselling the home over and over, and using resale restrictions. CLTs use public subsidies to lower the initial price of a home to a level that's affordable to their target home buyer. They can do this in a few ways. They can use public resources to subsidize the cost of acquisition or construction, or they could use the subsidies to help a home buyer purchase an existing home. But no matter how they do it, by bringing the home into the trust, they remove it from the market. Remember, CLTs never sell the land that they acquire, and therefore resell the same home over and over. When an eligible home buyer purchases a CLT home, they sign the ground lease that upfront outlines how the resale will work, including their maximum sale price and the eligibility factors for the subsequent buyer. When that subsequent buyer purchases the home, they sign a new 99-year ground lease and agree to sell it at a resale restricted price, again and again and again. The way that permanently affordable homeownership programs make homes initially affordable is by closing that affordability gap. Let's say that the average market price of a home is $200,000, but the family we're working with can only afford to purchase a $155,000 home. There's a $45,000 gap between what the family can afford and what a home on the market costs. This is our affordability gap. And unfortunately, in many communities where market values increase faster than income, this affordability gap just gets bigger. Our goal is to be forward thinking and to address those future needs, in part right now by ensuring that CLT homes remain affordable for under-resourced homebuyers in perpetuity. Now I'll give you a comparative example. Let's start with a more traditional model of affordable homeownership, something like a down payment assistance grant. In this fictional case, the city offers under-resourced homebuyers a grant to help them purchase a home on the market. The city doesn't expect any kind of repayment on the grant. In this example, the market price of the home is $200,000, but the homebuyer can only afford to purchase a $155,000 home. So there's a $45,000 gap. The city gives the homebuyer a $45,000 grant to fill the gap, and that homebuyer purchases the $200,000 home. 10 years later, the homeowner is ready to sell. Their home has appreciated in value to $240,000, so that is their sales price. Since the program that made the home affordable in the first place was grant-based, no money comes back to the city, it stays with the seller. The homeowner actually got an above market rate return on their investment. The $40,000 in appreciation, plus that $45,000 grant that the city put in. This is on top of their own equity, like their original down payment and the principal paydown of their mortgage. But the need for affordable homeownership opportunities hasn't gone away. There are still more families to serve. So 10 years later, this program needs to help a new family purchase a new home on the market. In this example, market values have risen to $240,000. We just saw that. But oftentimes, increases in incomes don't keep pace with increases in home values. In our example, our new home buyer can only afford a $185,000 home. Now there's a $55,000 gap that needs to be filled to help a similar family purchase a similar home. If this was our only way of creating affordable homeownership opportunities, we would need an ever-growing pot of subsidy, and it's unlikely that we would ever really make a meaningful dent in the community's affordable housing needs. The CLT model is structured in a fundamentally different way. In this example, we have the same home buyer, and the same $45,000 gap. But instead of providing a grant to the home buyer, the city is going to invest $45,000 in writing down the cost of the home through land donations and construction subsidies to the CLT. So our home buyer purchases the home from the community land trust for the below market rate of $155,000. 10 years later, our home has still increased in value, but CLT homeowners do not sell for the market value of the home. They sell for an agreed upon resale restricted price. In this case, $185,000. In this example, I'm using a resale formula, which increases the original purchase price 2% every year. This is the formula the Indianapolis CLT Advisory Board has selected, and it's designed to track changes in income as opposed to changes in the market. The program portion actually grows. It's $55,000, the difference between the resale value and the market value, but it stays in the home to assist the next buyer. The seller walks away with $30,000 plus any equity like their original down payment and the principal pay down of their mortgage. Let's look at this from the perspective of the next buyer in the program. The key difference in the CLT model is that it resells the same home as opposed to trying to purchase a new home on the market. So instead of needing to help the next buyer purchase a $240,000 home on the market, the CLT helps them to purchase the resale restricted home for $185,000. Magically, $185,000 is exactly what our new homeowner can afford. Remember, our advisory board has chosen to base our resale formula on a fixed rate rather than the market. And the CLT doesn't need to invest any new money in the subsequent purchase. This is how CLTs maximize public investments. They put them to work for generation after generation of under-resourced homebuyers. Now, I realize that the real world is not as simple as this example, but hopefully you're seeing the difference between the two models and what could be possible. CLTs also know that promising to make a home permanently affordable does not result in the home actually being permanently affordable. That requires oversight and support, which falls under the broad category of stewardship. CLTs do three kinds of stewardship at once. They steward the structure or the home. If the home is to remain affordable, it needs to remain in good condition. So CLTs do things like require that the home is adequately insured and improve all substantial renovations and additions. They can also educate homeowners about preventative maintenance, encourage capital improvements, and help homeowners through renovations to prevent contractor fraud. CLTs also steward homeowners. While homeowners are not permitted to sell for the full market value of their home, CLTs try to design resale formulas that balance ongoing affordability with wealth creation. And we know that for homeowners to be able to realize wealth creation, they can't just attain homeownership. They need to retain homeownership over time. So CLTs do things like require homebuyer counseling before purchase. They also review all mortgage and refinance documents to prevent predatory lending. In some cases, CLTs also offer post-purchase counseling and foreclosure prevention counseling to help bolster homeowners who need it. Finally, CLTs also steward the public funds used to make the home affordable in the first place. Every CLT makes a promise that funds will serve generation after generation of homeowners, and the key to success is the resale restriction. So to make good on their promise, CLTs oversee every element of resale, including calculating the formula price and income certifying the next home buyer. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Washburn. He's helping us to launch the Community Land Trust here in Indianapolis. He was the executive director of the City of Lake CLT for over 20 years and has great experience and knowledge as to how the Community Land Trust is an affordable housing solution.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi again, everyone. Again, my name is Jeff Washburn, a consultant with the Indy CLT. Stephanie asked if I just spend a couple slides here just talking about how community land trusts really are a key component to the affordable housing solution, especially today. Starting out with this first bullet point, as we're all very well aware, there's many federal sources that pass through local government, CDBG, home, ARP funds here most recently, and those dollars are already making their way into our community. And as Stephanie shared through her slides, by investing those dollars, they don't necessarily even need to flow through a community land trust, but through developments, affordable housing projects in the state of Indiana. By augmenting that work and by putting those funds into a community land trust, we're able then to demonstrate not only the assistance to one household, but for multiple generations of households moving forward. As illustrated in the examples that Stephanie used, every time a CLT resale occurs, that investment, and I'll just share from my own experience, those investments were starting to get pretty big over the last few years in Minneapolis. Upwards of 6 digits in affordability assistance were going in to help each buyer that we were assisting, and rightfully so. Taxpayers in the state would say that's a lot of money for one household, but upon every resale, that per household investment actually reduces. So if you think about making a $100,000 investment today in a household to help them achieve home ownership, they turn around and sell their home in 10 years. That's really only $50,000 in public investment per household. And if you start to see that over multiple resales, that per household investment actually could get down to $25,000 or less per household. Again, assuming increases in home values, CLTs are also able to demonstrate that public ROI. In the example that Stephanie used, the impact on that next buyer, there was $35,000 in new affordability investment created through the market that's essentially passed on to the next buyer without the public sector having to put dollars in. Or another way to look at it is that initial investment made by the public sector in the affordability of the home actually increases in time by riding essentially the market function, which is a real powerful thing, especially if demonstrated over multiple resales. In our experience in Minnesota, CLTs have demonstrated their ability to serve households at the same AMIs as many affordable rental projects. For example, the organization I worked with on average was serving households at 51% of AMI, right in the same space that a lot of the low-income housing tax credits serve. In our state's experience, a lot of those affordable housing rental projects would then need to be resubsidized, every 15 to 20 years, recapitalized, whereas the Community Land Trust was able to keep that permanent affordability going without requiring an added subsidization of those properties. During the foreclosure crisis, 10, 15 years ago, Grounded Solutions Network was studying what is the impact on land trust homeowners, and what shook out of that. And a lot of this was due to the stewardship function that Stephanie mentioned. Foreclosures were happening at a rate of less than 50% of what the market rate homeowners were experiencing in similar markets. And a lot of that was due to the stewardship of the land trust supporting the homeowners that got into home ownership, providing support to ensure that they were able to make their mortgage payments and ensuring that long-term success of the homeowner. I like to call it our organization, the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, the organization I worked for 20 years. We got into a really good habit of every 2 years surveying existing homeowners, asking them what was working well, what wasn't working well. Are they better off than when they, prior to purchasing their home? And the most recent study that we did also took a look at the over 120 past homeowners that had lived in land trust homes to see where they are today. And that survey showed that over 70% of the homeowners that we assisted into community land trust home ownership went on to buy market rate homes within 2 years of selling their land trust home. And what that means is that there was equity. They were able to walk away with enough proceeds from those land trust home purchases to be able to go on and buy in the market, which freed up an affordable ownership unit and really demonstrates how the community land trust helps bridge renters into home ownership and then works within the affordable housing continuum. Buyer's choice. And I think one of the misconceptions of community land trust that's often cited is, why would I buy a community land trust home if I could go out and get 100% of the appreciation of a home in the market? And what's really important is that the choice shouldn't be, and what land trusts do isn't taking folks out of a market rate home ownership opportunity. What they're doing is creating an opportunity for somebody who otherwise would never be able to get into home ownership. So that the real choice is between renting and affordable community land trust ownership, especially at a time when it's become increasingly cost prohibitive for folks to bridge into home ownership. 20 years ago, with a modest subsidy, a lot of folks were able to get into home ownership. What's happening today is that we need every tool in the toolbox to create that affordability. Not only a deeper affordability gap subsidy, but also looking at tools and programs to reduce interest rates. And then I think as part of this conversation, how do we even look at the property taxes and show that maybe there's a fair taxing approach that could be made with community land trust to make home ownership more affordable, given the resale restrictions and requirements associated with community land trust home ownership. Thank you for the opportunity. With that, I'll hand it back to Hale.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers so far. Now we're going to start talking about the legislation involved with these topics that we've gotten into today. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Andrew, to lead that part of the conversation. And then after this is when Q&A starts. So just a reminder, if you want to put questions in the chat, please feel free to. We will get to them at the end.
Thanks again, Hale, and big thanks to our presenters, John West from Ball State, and then Jeff and Stephanie talking about CLTs. Really appreciate them talking about, they're the people who are the experts in that subject matter. They are bringing that, helping enrich what we're doing here with the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. And so before I jump in, we have 4 pieces of legislation that are brand new, just introduced, that we want to preview for you. 1 of each for the subject matter we just talked about, and then 2 others we want to make sure that you know about. But before I jump into that, I do want to just connect why we're talking and focusing so much on land banks and community land trust today. So if you've been with the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition for the past 4 years now, you're aware that Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition convenes partners from across Indiana to provide education and advocacy to achieve equitable federal, state, and local policies for housing stability and affordability solutions. And for the past few years, we've really been focusing, especially during the height of the COVID pandemic, on housing stability, preventing evictions, making sure people were safe, stably, and then affordably housed. And so part of that work is to make sure that we're increasing the supply of safe, stable, affordable housing. We know that there's a deficit of 120,000 affordable and available rental units in Indiana. And we know that there's an eviction filing rate of 1 in 10 renter households. So we know that stability and affordability problem are deeply connected to the supply. And both community land trusts and land banks are one way that communities can increase that supply long term. And so on the policy end, we're happy to say that now that there are live policy options to advance both of those housing avenues. So let's start to look at this. There is now a bill for each of community land trusts and land banks. Let's go to the next slide and start taking a look. And because we have a couple of extra minutes to our presenters, I want to put you on deck. I'm going to describe a little bit of what each of these bills does, but because we have a little bit of time, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, how would this impact the work that you're doing on each of these subjects? So first up, land banks. There is a bill that was introduced. Again, this session of the Indiana General Assembly just started this past week, and now we're starting to see exactly what bills are on the table. There is a House Bill 1212, land banks, and I'm happy to report that Representative Elizabeth Rowray, Republican of Muncie, has been working with Prosperity Indiana members and folks like John West, who just spoke with you. The content of this bill directly comes from the recommendations of those Prosperity Indiana members who are working on this. So really happy to say that this is addressing specifically some of the needs that they brought forward. And as you can see here, a really big piece of this bill is that it requires county executives to provide a list of those tax sale properties that have gone through 2 tax sales and haven't been picked up. And then they then have the option, the ability to offer those to the land banks within 60 days. The bill also does a couple of things kind of on the administrative level. It kind of strengthens the administration and leadership of land banks. And then it also provides critically, as John mentioned earlier, that currently Indiana's code authorizes land banks, but it doesn't provide resources. This provides several optional ways that local governments can provide resources for land banks. So it doesn't require anybody to do these things, but it allows neighborhood investment fee up to $150. It allows an additional penalty for delinquent property taxes of an additional 3%, up to a total of 8%. And then also it allows an optional $15 fee for each document recorded on tracts within that land bank territory. So John, let me turn it to you. And if you could cast, how could this help the Muncie Land Bank, and how do you see this improving land banking in Indiana?
Well, I'll take it from the 2 points, the two most important points, which are access to property and funding. So currently, the counties have a really hard time sort of understanding what their inventory of tax foreclosed property is. They don't have any sort of incentive to keep track of properties that have gone through the tax lien sale numerous times. And so requiring counties just to keep track of where those properties are and to provide them to another unit of government would really improve things quite a bit, just knowing what's out there. I think that, I can't remember, I think we have about 2,200 properties that have gone through the tax lien sale out of a total of about 30,000 properties. And then there's another 4,000 properties that are no longer going through the tax lien sale. They're just kind of in limbo. So knowing what's out there would be really, really helpful. And I know that we've worked in the past to require counties to turn those properties over if requested by the land bank, but the counties are very reluctant to do that, I think, for justifiable reasons. And then in terms of the funding portion, the neighborhood investment fee, I think, is really well targeted, so that fee is charged to anyone who enters a tax lien sale. So if you are one of the people that's going to bid on properties in a tax lien sale, and I think it's the winners of the bid, pay an additional $150 on whatever else it is that they're paying for the property. But it's a well-targeted fee, and the revenue would, I think that we've calculated the revenue from one or two of these would be sufficient to hire a staff member to run a land bank, which is really kind of the most important thing. There's also language in the legislation that enables counties or cities to use existing existing employee positions to run the land bank, which it would also be really, really helpful. So if instead of the land bank having to go out and hire someone and pay for insurance and all that stuff, if it could be a city or a county employee, that would make a really big difference. So all three of these things are quite helpful. And it gets us closer to the model of Ohio, and maybe puts us a little bit ahead of Michigan in terms of their practice.
Thanks, John, and thanks for clarifying. I kind of condensed and talked about the leadership, but I'm glad you mentioned that that's one thing that could be really helpful to local governments, is for them to be able to have some of the employees working for land banks. So we know about this bill. It's been assigned to the House Local Government Committee. And in just a minute, I want to make sure that we're moving through the other bills that we want to talk about, but we're going to bring for you ways that you can act on this to help us make sure that it gets a hearing. That's the critical next step, is that each of these bills have to get a hearing really basically by the end of this month in order to move forward. So John, I'm going to move on to the next slide. We may have a chance to continue to talk about each of these bills individually or as a group, but let's go ahead and talk next about community land trusts. So for this bill, I actually want to give a lot of credit to Stephanie and the group of community land trust practitioners. The content of this bill actually came from research that group did and put forward. So we have actually two bills that are very similar. In fact, they have the similar, exact same title. There's a couple of small differences between them, but we have House Bill 1029 from Representative Maureen Bauer, Democrat from South Bend, and then Senate Bill 207 from Senator Shelley Yoder, Democrat of Bloomington. We know that the House bill has been assigned to House local government, wait a minute, excuse me. I'm sorry. I said back, I mixed something up just to correct myself. The Community Land Trust bill has actually been assigned to House Ways and Means, while the Land Bank bill has been assigned to House Local Government. And then the Senate version of the Community Land Trust bill has been assigned to Senate Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. So both of these bills, you can see they have big picture, they're very similar in terms of their effect. And it gets at that issue that we just heard about from Jeff and Stephanie, that community land trusts are meant to provide permanent affordable housing, but you create this issue where the current structure of property tax assessment could basically create an unfair playing field. And you see here that this bill would address that issue of paying property taxes based on the price you would receive for the homes if they were to sell them. That for most homeowners, that's the market price. However, for this, it provides that there's that issue of legally obligated to sell their homes at the price that keeps them affordable. So the bottom line here in that final bullet is this bill would make it clear that community land trust homeowners should have their homes assessed at the below market value. So that's kind of the key thing. So Stephanie and Jeff, do you want to speak to, a little bit of like, why is this bill so important? Why did your group want to put this together? And if there's anything you want to say about how this will improve community land trusts throughout Indiana.
Yeah, I'd love to take a stab at it, and Jeff can chime in, excuse me, with anything that I may have missed. This really speaks to fairness. So the reality is our CLT home buyers aren't going to be able to get that market value on their home and take all of that equity with them. So they shouldn't be taxed as if they are, because they're not getting that benefit. They should only be taxed on that subsidized price. And that can have a huge difference when you're talking about people with a lower area median income. In Indianapolis, we're looking to serve households between 30 and 60% AMI. These are households that typically could not find a home in the market, would not be able to afford that. And as a one-person household, that yearly income would range from $20,000 to $40,000. The difference in taxes for a home that was subsidized or paying market value could be over $1,000 just in tax difference. And for somebody that's only making $20,000 to $40,000, that around extra $100 a month just in taxes can be a huge difference in being able to pay their other bills and keep up with their mortgage and buy food and all of those other things. So not only is it a matter of fairness, but really wanting to make sure that these are truly affordable for the population that we're hoping to serve.
Thanks. I would only offer maybe from a Minnesota context. We had a couple of changes over the last couple of years in Minnesota that were game changers for community land trusts across the state. The first being in the city of Minneapolis, the city assessors were able to get a ruling from our state to allow them to assess the land trust properties at the land trust price versus the fair market value. And that went into play a couple of years ago, which translated, this is right about the same time that inflation was creeping up, translated to essentially more disposable income to the households that had purchased homes through the City of Lakes Community Land Trust, which is huge. At a statewide level, for many years, affordable rental providers were able to see a favorable tax treatment in Minnesota at roughly about 60% of what the fair market taxation was for like properties. And so affordable rental, if they could demonstrate they were serving households below 60% of median income, those properties are taxed at about 60% of what any other comparable property would be. This last legislative session, community land trusts were able to essentially get the legislature to agree to reducing statewide property taxes across the state for community land trust homeowners to 75% of the 1% tax rate in Minnesota. The huge difference here, in my opinion, is that While many of the affordable rental providers are nonprofits and those dollars saved translate into savings for the households that are served, in many cases, those reduced property taxes don't make their way to the tenants of those properties. Whereas with favorable taxation for community land trust homeowners, that's a direct benefit to the households that are served, working to assist the lower income households in the community land trust.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephanie and Jeff. So now we have these two live pieces of legislation. These are ways to, again, strengthen these opportunities to extend the pipeline from stable housing to home ownership and to stronger communities. Now let's look, there's two more pieces of legislation. And I have to tell you, we have good news and bad news. But let's talk about the good news first. On habitability. So this, if you're familiar with our work last year, there was Senate Bill 202 from Senator Fadi Kadora that got almost up to the place of getting a full committee hearing, and then it ended up getting stripped and turned to a study committee bill. Unfortunately, that bill, did not pass. This year, on some of the same key subject matter issues, we are really, really pleased to report that as of 2 hours ago, Senate Bill 277 was introduced with lead author Senator Greg Walker, Republican of Columbus. He was the co-author on the bill from last year. And this bill shares some of the same key characteristics. So we're really, really excited. This is our Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition's, probably our top priority bill that reflects some of the housing stability elements that we've been working on for the past 3-4 years. And you can see right here, we now have the final introduced version of this bill. We need to kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb and see what the differences are from last year, but there are some similar things here. This bill would provide enforcement of health and safety standards in housing, primarily through allowing a court to appoint a receiver on the request of a local government for properties accumulating nuisance actions. So again, you can have a local government put a property into receivership if there are a lot of repeat nuisance actions. It also allows the local government to bring those nuisance actions against a tenant or other responsible person. We believe we need responsible property and landlords. We also need responsible tenants. So there's an idea of parity there. It defines essential services that landlords must maintain, including heat and sewage and some other key things. It requires a landlord to keep a unit free from a list of bad things, including pests, mold, and rot. And it also requires the landlord to repair and replace, or at least address those essential services in a short amount of time. Last year we had 24 hours. I need to double check. I think that might be extended out to 36 hours in this case. And also finally and critically, this bill allows courts to order remedies for non-compliance. So through the courts, it allows judges to put their, it allows judges to have tenants put their rent into an escrow account with the court clerk until the judge determines that the landlord has taken remedial action, basically like fix the problem. So that is the really key thing. In 44 states, there are enforcement mechanisms like this one that make sure that if a tenant is doing their part, if they're fulfilling their part of the contract, they're keeping up on rent, then the landlord also has to fulfill their part, or else the rent isn't going to get to them. So that is a really, really important thing that we think is super, super important. I'm happy to report that this bill has been assigned to the Senate Local Government Committee. The bill last year had been sent to Senate Judiciary, and where it wasn't given a full hearing. So in just a minute, we're going to talk about ways that you can help us make sure that this bill and the others we're talking about get full and fair hearings. But before we do that, I do have some bad news. We have a bad problem bill that I'm sad that I have to talk with you about. So we learned this just yesterday. House Bill 1413 with the title State and Local Policies on Homelessness has been introduced by Representative Michelle Davis, Republican of Greenwood. This is a bad bill, folks. This is a problem. This is a bill, on first glance, we can see it is very similar to other bills that have been introduced. There's model language from national groups, out-of-state groups that fly in and drop in bills like this on states, including from groups like ALEC and especially a group called the Cicero Institute. This bill basically attacks at a fundamental level homelessness services that use the housing first model, a model that is proven to be effective and that's used and relied on by some of the most effective homelessness service groups here in Indiana. So again, this bill would undermine that effective homelessness services. This bill would basically, it would cancel the current state appropriation for housing first, and then it would reallocate those resources and put a lot of new onerous requirements on top of them that are punitive, expensive, counterproductive, and maybe most importantly, harmful to some of the most marginalized communities in Indiana. So this is bad news, folks. The bill would essentially criminalize homelessness, and it has a model of basically setting up homelessness camps and putting additional restrictions. And then it would criminalize local governments who try to apply housing first principles, basically by saying that the Attorney General could sue those local governments. So we'll provide you, there's some resources here. Again, this has been seen in many states at the national level or around the state. I mean, there is a federal bill that's very similar to this as well, but other states have been battling with this, and we are going to need all of your help to make sure that this bill doesn't become law. This bill has been assigned to the Government and Regulatory Reform Committee that is chaired by Representative Doug Miller, who had been the chair of the Housing Task Force from the past couple of years. Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition members have already put in a request to talk with him, with the bill author, as well as with the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee about this bill. We're so concerned. We did that within 12 hours of this bill being introduced. We're taking this very seriously. So again, we need all of your help. So let's go to one more slide. We know that there's a bunch of other housing bills. We don't have time to go through all of those, but I wanted to make sure to let you know that if you are signed up for Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition emails, then you will get access to the list. And it's a sample here. Every time you click that link, you can see an update of the status of those bills. You can see where they've been assigned. You can see if and when they've been assigned to a committee hearing. We look at all that information every day, and we're prioritizing. You know, there's many housing bills. A good number of them will never get a hearing, but we want to make sure that we're keeping an eye on them and knowing which ones are good, which ones could be improved, which ones are bad. And making sure that we're bringing you the right action steps. So again, we want to make sure that not just you, but all the people that you work with and all of your networks have access to this information. So that's my plug, to make sure that all of your friends and colleagues are signed up for these updates. So let's move on to the next steps of how else you can get involved. Let's go on, next slide. So first of all, on these bills, we want to make sure you know how to contact your legislators. And then the slide after this will show you ways that we show you, or that we get you engaged on those issues. But this slide, and again, we'll send you the links. This is how you can determine who is your legislator and who are your legislators. That's a key thing I want to make sure to underline, is that you might go to this page, and if you type in your home address, it'll tell you, who are the people that you vote for, who's on your ballot. If you put in your work address, it would show those people for your work address. But I really want to encourage you to be thinking about who multiple legislators represent your entire service area. A lot of state legislative lines don't follow neatly with city boundaries or even county boundaries. And so it's really important. If you cover a 10-county area, there's a good chance that you have 20 up to 30 different legislators that could be touching on different parts of your your service area. And some of those might be some of the committee members of the key committees that we've already talked about. So we're going to really need to make sure that when you're signing up for our advocacy events, that you click those counties. We kind of rely on you to know your service area. We can't necessarily know that for you. So let's talk about how we're applying this. The next big thing that's on the table on the next slide is our State House Day on January 31st, Wednesday, January 31st. This is Prosperity Indiana State House Day. It's also the opportunity for all of our different coalitions to come together and unite on some shared policy priorities. So this is also the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition State House Day. This is our opportunity to make sure that we're having all the good bills get a hearing. It's basically the last push. If they haven't got a hearing basically by the end of this week, that's the last chance. And then it's our chance to look ahead and make sure that we're talking to some of the key legislators who have a say in making this bill pass, each of these bills pass on one side, or in the case of that bad anti-housing first bill, we want to make sure to warn folks and say, this bill, you shall not pass here. So it's really important for you to come and join us. You can see here on the screen, these are the benefits that we provide for you. We want to make sure that you have a good and engaging and rewarding time. It's a chance for you to network with other Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition members, as well as Prosperity Indiana members. And for the first time this year, there's going to be a combined event from 12 to 1 on this day with all of Prosperity Indiana's partners and also the partners of Indiana United Ways. So we want you to come. We're going to start. Registration starts at 8 in the morning. We're planning to have some sort of like kickoff event at 9, and then legislator meetings throughout the morning, and then that shared event at 12. And for those who register and attend, we'll provide coffee and light breakfast, and then we'll have a light lunch for you, some sandwiches. So want to make sure that you are able to come and that you RSVP as soon as possible so that we know who's coming and we know how many sandwiches to order. That's all very important. So Hale, I want to turn it back to you. Is there anything else you want to make sure that we're communicating about State House Day or other ways to get involved?
Thank you, Andrew. I think you covered everything. One thing I'll clarify for folks is that you can register now. Registration is open right now. That QR code should take you there. I can also drop a link in the chat shortly, or actually, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind doing that.
Will do.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify that because I know he said registration table opens at 8. That really just means check-in table. So you can register right now. Please register before coming to the event, and then we'll just have a check-in table. So yeah, please join us for this. It was a really great event last year. You can see the pictures in the corner. It's interesting for you. It's helpful for us. And really, I think it's helpful for all of Indiana when we're talking about how important these policies are.
Mm-hmm.
So
I've got one more thing, Hale, that I just remembered.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that people aren't feeling like they're walking into this out of the blue and they won't know and how to be prepared. Hopefully you had joined us last fall for our Advocacy 101 series, but if you didn't, don't worry. We're going to have a prep webinar on Friday, January 26th to walk you through the nuts and bolts of what to expect, including where to park, what information is going to be covered, who you're meeting with. But the first step, again, is for you to register, and that is the link that I'm dropping in the chat now. All right, back to you, Hale.
Great, thank you. Well, now we're going to jump into Q&A. So I am going to start reading aloud for accessibility purposes, some of the questions in the chat. Hopefully we can get through all of them before our cutoff time at 2:30. But speakers, if you could be prepared to address these. The first one, I know John partially did get it, but I'm going to read it out loud. Do state and/or local laws allow commercial properties to be acquired and held by a land bank, or only residential? And essentially, what dictates that? Is it the bylaws of the land bank? Is it a law? Can you answer that, John?
Land banks can hold any kind of property. It's in the state law as it's currently written. Sometimes we get kind of pushed into a residential lane, politically within our various communities, but some really successful land banks have, done resident or done commercial and even industrial properties.
Thank you. Another question. At CLTs, can houses be used by owners as equity for second mortgage, etc.? Stephanie or Jeff?
From my understanding, yes, but there would be some things that our advisory board would look at related to like how much equity they could take out, as we want to make sure that our homeowners don't end up underwater in their mortgage, and any sort of refinance or second mortgage would go through us to make sure that our homeowners aren't being taken advantage of or having some sort of predatory arrangement. And if I missed something, Jeff, please chime in.
I think you answered it well, Stephanie. I would just say in most cases, land trusts aren't going to allow the homeowner to take out more equity than what their share of the equity would be at any given point in time, but typically don't want to be too restrictive on those funds that are technically the homeowner share of any appreciation and or equity.
Great, thank you. This next one's a little bit longer. Has anyone used land trust to own the land under multifamily housing? The idea would be to make affordable rental units more affordable to build/rehab, and also to have some local say about the maintenance of the building and the tenants that live there, which in parentheses, looking to decrease the amount of crime in some of our large affordable housing complexes with out-of-state owners.
Yeah, I believe there are some groups, especially out of New York, doing some work in the multifamily housing. It's definitely possible, but definitely gets to be more complex, as there may be some different mechanisms that need to work when it's a multifamily unit, and deciding if it's a rental versus like a kind of like a condo type of situation. It can get kind of complex, but it has been done from my understanding.
Jeff, anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, from my perspective, the use of the community land trust and multifamily rental is really dictated by kind of the local environment. If there's a lot of what I'll call strong, affordable rental providers in a particular region, city, then a lot of times maybe the land trust isn't going to play that role. But to Stephanie's point, on the East Coast, a lot of land trusts, and also I think dictated by just the cost of ownership housing, utilizing the land trust for rental purposes is done more often on both coasts, more so than in the Midwest, as a way to not only create but preserve the long-term affordability. I think a lot of states also, the use of the land trust is used as a long-term community ownership tool. So in the instances that I mentioned before, where maybe there's a for-profit developer utilizing the tax credit to create some affordable rental units, after that tax credit period is up, in theory, those investors, that tax credit deal could be sold to the market. And so putting a deal like that on land trust land ensures that there's going to be longer term affordability beyond the tax credit duration that might be stipulated by the funders on the onset.
Thank you. Okay, another one. How is affordability initially created for CLTs without some kind of subsidy? In many neighborhoods in Evansville, the cost of construction is more than the market value of a finished home. Even if the CLT sold the home at a cost, it would not be affordable, at cost, it would not be affordable for lower income residents.
Yeah, Eric, you're exactly right. And we're definitely seeing that here. The cost of construction is so high for new homes. Affordability initially can't be created without some kind of subsidy, would be my understanding there.
Jeff, anything? Just gonna keep offering.
I would just, my experience of doing this for 20 years, increasingly a good chunk of my job was just constantly raising funds to create additional affordability investments to create more land trust homes. I think, again, kind of the comparison is to step back from this and say, how much gap is being used in all other types of affordable housing, and the benefit, the value add here with the community land trust is that those investments are going in, and they're going in one time, and we're able to use them for multiple generations of low income households to assist them into home ownership. dollars across the nation are being spent on affordable housing initiatives. It's kind of this change in mentality to say, how do we make sure that we make those investments go longer term, because it's just getting too cost prohibitive to put the dollars in one time, or maybe 1.5 times and then lose it back to the market, or that amount of money 10 years from now just isn't going to be able to help a household because of the increase in cost.
Sure, thank you. The next one is there any legislation addressing the corporate buyers turning tax lien sale houses into rental properties? And Andrew, I think I might turn this to you, but first what I'll say is, I don't think so. Just so you guys know, bills are dropping like crazy right now, so it is a little hard to keep track of every single one and making sure we truly understand every single one. We've only had a few days to do this, and they're still dropping regularly. I will say, I don't remember seeing any like these. And honestly, part of the issue with a bill like this is the Commerce Clause, which essentially gets down to, it's very hard to limit any sort of buyer and tell them what to do with a property that they purchase and then own. Of course, there are exceptions to this, but it's just very limiting, and it very much interacts with that, constitutional issue that, from what I'm hearing, legislators do have some concerns about things like out-of-state companies coming and buying up in-state homes and things like that. But the limits that you can place on it are very limited, frankly, just because of constitutional law. So Andrew, is there anything you want to add to that?
The one thing that I'll say, and that's right, and I think that it is true that just like the current makeup of the General Assembly and the climate is like, I think a full frontal prohibition on that. Even if it was found to be a constitutional bill, it might be hard to get it a committee hearing, get it started. Doesn't mean that it's not worth looking at and trying. But I also want to say that I know that Senator Walker has been thinking carefully with this new bill. And again, I need to read through every little bit of it. It was just dropped 2 hours ago. I think he's hoping to get at the cumulative impact of corporate purchasers with the places like the limitation. Senator Cador's bill from last year said that a lot of the provisions for the enforcement of habitability didn't apply if an owner owned less than 4 units. And I think that Senator Walker is trying to get at that, like, yeah, making sure that we're not letting a lot of shell companies and things slip through there. So I think there's going to be some language ultimately that if you collectively own more than 4 units, even if it's different shell companies, that it would still apply to you. So keep tuned, but we're keeping an eye on that, and we know that that's a large long-term issue.
Thank you. Could you please repeat what committee Senate Bill 277, the habitability bill, was assigned to?
We're pleased to announce that it's Senate Local Government chaired by Senator Jim Buck, Republican of Kokomo. Yeah, and I'll just leave it at that. Like, we will, Senator Cadora's bill 2 years ago came to local government. His bill last year went to Senate Judiciary, and then Senator Walker bill is back to local government. And I think the rationale is that this gets to some of the things that local governments can do, and then how it applies once it gets to the court system.
Great, thank you. I just want to acknowledge that we only have 4 minutes left, but we're going to try and get through these last few questions. We may go a minute or two over for folks who want to stick around and hear that. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered will get a copy of that recording. So if you have to run, you can come back and watch these last few minutes to get the answer you wanted. So the next question is there a recording available for the Advocacy 101 session that was done last fall? So yes, in short, these are available to Prosperity Indiana members only though. So our process essentially here at PI is that anybody can register for these as they're happening and receive the recording. But if you miss that and do not register, then that recording only becomes available to PI members. So Scott, please feel free to reach out to me about that personally, and I'd be happy to look into that and help you. Another question, thank you, Alvin. I think I did miss that one. For CLTs, what happens if there is a foreclosure?
Yeah, thank you. So that is where a CLT is a good thing, and that is helping to steward that public investment. The under the ground lease, the community land trust would be able to either make that foreclosure right and help keep the family potentially in that home and working out something with them, or if they're not in a situation where they're maybe their income changed and they're no longer able to afford their regular monthly payment. Um, Potentially be right before it even gets to foreclosure, when we have a good relationship with that homeowner, they could have come to us and we could have worked to get somebody else into that home before it negatively impacted their credit and things like that. And then still keeping the home affordable for that next buyer.
I would only offer, in addition to Stephanie's, comments on kind of the front end and providing support to homeowners and ideally keeping them in their homes, and if not that, assisting them in finding a soft landing from foreclosure. Not everybody, life happens, and sometimes people just aren't able to maintain their homes. I think the absolute beauty of the community land trust is not necessarily when there's an up market. And the homes keep them affordable. But the real beauty with community land trust is really protecting those most vulnerable in home ownership. So if there's a downturn in the market, they're facing a hardship in foreclosure, as Stephanie shared, land trusts are there to help support them. But also in the event of a full foreclosure, and we experienced this up in Minneapolis, in those instances, the bank is foreclosing on the improvements or the structure. The land trust is still retaining ownership of the land, and it forces a conversation between the community land trust and the bank. It's not always a pleasant conversation, and definitely was not during 2011-12 during the foreclosure crisis, where there were some significant losses. But it created a scenario where the land trust could come forward with an offer, rationalize that offer. Oftentimes, the land trust was taking a haircut as well, but get to a place where you came back with a price that allowed the land trust to repurchase the improvements from the lender and make it affordable for another low-income household. Again, not pretty, but we never, over 520 homeowners, we never lost a home back to the market. And some of those instances weren't the best, but what we were able to do is ensure not only permanent affordable, but also keeping all those properties as assets in the community.
Yeah. Another question, how many properties exist in Indiana that are eligible for a land bank status? Or if there is an area, city or county that this information would be available at, I believe that would be helpful. John, any thoughts? I see you're uncertain.
It's really hard to get data on property vacancy. It's should be easier to get data on the number of properties that go through the tax lien foreclosure process. And I think that this legislation would make that data, it would require that data is public, because it's important for us to know. I think that you would have to reach out to each county to ask how many properties have gone through the lien sale, but that's not complete, because sometimes counties just stop spending the money to put them up in the auction, and they just are kind of in a limbo. There's no central repository for that. I've done some analysis of Delaware County that I'd be happy to share if you want to send me an email. It requires quite a bit of explanation.
All right, thanks, John. I actually see two different comments about this one bill, House Bill 113. It wants to make investment firms wait for 90 days after a single family home goes on the market before they can purchase. I have seen this bill. I am tracking this bill. I think it's very interesting. And in theory, I do think it could be very helpful to the problem that we were discussing earlier of these companies just snatching up huge swaths of homes that, real people could live in. However, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm not entirely clear how legal this would be. I don't know if it would pass the constitutionality tests that would eventually get brought up. And just again, the reason why I say that is because I have been told by people who are lawyers and who have looked into this extensively that really anything that prevents or severely limits someone's purchasing power across state lines is likely a violation of this constitutional clause. And this is a limit that is, I would say, probably somewhat substantial. So I don't know I'm watching it though. I will attend any hearings about it, and I will be sure to update the bill list with notes. That's something I'm not sure Andrew mentioned. When you get these bill lists where we're tracking legislation, whenever there's a committee hearing that I'm able to attend, I will be updating the document with my personal notes, which will be live updated because you have a link. So you will have that available, and I will keep everyone as posted as possible on matters like this.
The one thing
Andrew,
I'll
it looks
add
like
is
you wanted
taking
to-
a quick look at House Bill 1113 is authored by Representative Cherish Pryor, Democrat of Indianapolis. She's had some really thoughtful bills on like property tax and like home ownership pipeline in the past. I see that this bill has been assigned to the House Financial Institutions Committee, which is kind of rare. I don't remember bills like this going to that committee in the past. It's chaired by Representative Mike Speedy, Republican of Southern Marion County. So one thing, I definitely don't want to discourage anybody. Feel free, especially if you see members of that committee that cover your service area. That is a great next step, is to reach out to them, ask if you can schedule a call with them. They're pretty busy, but I think that is the type of thing that you should ask for. And if nothing else, it also doesn't hurt to just like relay, you would like that committee to hear that bill if you're in support. That is absolutely something that you should do. And if you can get a conversation with the people that represent your service area, is to explain what would it mean for the work that you do.
Absolutely. I don't want to doubt anyone, or I don't want to discourage anyone for trying, because like I said, I think that idea is really promising. Can't say anything specifically about how it would pan out, but I like it personally. So definitely reach out to your senators and representatives and let them know how you feel about it. Let's see. I see that there was another one in here about CLTs, but Alvin from Kepler very helpfully answered that. Is there anything you wanted to add, Stephanie or Jeff, to Alvin's answer there?
Nope, you got it.
Okay. Scrolling, let's see some comments. I'm really glad people appreciated the webinar. I have heard that the Attic School Corporation did a very good job examining House Enrolled Act 1005 from 2023. Has anyone else heard that? Andrew, have you heard anything about that?
I have not, but I'd love to see it. If somebody send it to us, and I'll keep an eye out for that. And just for those who don't remember, 1005 from last year created the Housing Infrastructure Revolving Fund and Program. And so that ultimately it provides state money to incentivize the development of market rate housing. We wanted it to also target lower income housing, but we do recognize that more new housing is ultimately good, and we're continuing to talk with the author Doug Miller from that about ways that we could continue to strengthen that program and target it.
All right. Well, with that, I know we are over by 5 minutes, and this has already been a very long webinar. So I'm just going to say thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to our amazing speakers. It was a real knockout this time. Please scan the QR code if you're needing help getting connected to the coalition. Follow us on Twitter. Email me if you need anything at all. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks all.